Sooners' best defense since fill in the blank. And in the meantime, we will have Jason do it as well right here on Oklahoma Live. Appreciate you being here, the voice of college football. And you know the drill. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. We appreciate your super chat contributions here at the Voice of College Football. It's edition number 150. And this guy's been along for the ride for most of those by far. Jason Ray, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. We're officially 4 weeks away from Oklahoma kickoff, and then like three weeks and a day away from college football, just generally speaking. So it's an exciting part of the year. So I'm excited to get started.
We're going to talk to some defense, folks. So again, leave your comments and questions there in the chat. Of course, this has been a program that has been resting on its offense for some fans. It seems like for the entire history of the program, because they don't know anything different than having elite quarterback play and wide receivers, and then just hoping the defense makes enough stops or one more than the opponent's defense, or make some kind of turnover to make things happen, but not having a dominant defense for sure, but not even having a competent defense at times. Three guys come to mind for me in a defensive effort last year that was good, that could be even better this year, would be, if you didn't watch this defense play and you just looked at a stats sheet, you would see that Billy Bowman, Danny Stutzman just had all sorts of crazy numbers in the box score. And not surprisingly, they're showing up on a ton of all SEC teams, even all America teams. And then the other guy, more from a playmaking standpoint and what the potential could be, would be Peyton Bowen. Of course, his recruitment was much ballyhooed, and he finally chose Oklahoma. And right out of the gate, spring game, early games in the season showed that he's a tremendous athlete. So right out of the gate, those are the three guys that come to mind. But certainly, Jason, you can start this discussion wherever you'd like.
Yeah, Mark, I think it's interesting, kind of on the opening that you had, just related to where this defense has been historically over the last 15, 20 years. It's really just been a situation where, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It was, a real reason why Oklahoma probably doesn't have another national championship here over the last 10 years. And as you'd mentioned, even with Brent Venables coming aboard, year one was not great. They started off, for the first 4 or 5 games pretty good, and then they turned into be one of the worst, unfortunately, one of the worst defenses in the country over the last 5 or 6 games, or specifically like the Big 12 season in and of itself. As you mentioned, last year was an improvement, but still probably not where they need to be. Right, there was some games down the stretch where it wasn't horrible by any stretch of the imagination, but there was a game. The final game of the regular season against TCU, where they gave up a ton of points. I want to say it was like 42 or 45 to TCU, and that was the most points that TCU scored all year. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a defense that has been much improved. I think, Mark, to your point about the individuals that you mentioned, I think this is probably the first time, I would say, in 20 years where Oklahoma probably has a first round draft pick. We'll see how the season goes, but I think on paper they have a first round draft pick probably at every level of the defense, and specifically that you'd mentioned, Billy Bowman and Danny Stutzman. Those are two guys that Oklahoma was very concerned that they wouldn't be part of this team this year, just in terms of an early entrance into the draft. So much so, Danny Stutzman actually declared, didn't hire an agent, then decided to come back, which was a big get for Oklahoma. I mean, those things are almost like getting a 4 or 5 star recruit, right? You get a guy that you maybe anticipate was leaving. And then Billy Bowman as well. He was a guy that never entered, but I think there was some thoughts that he probably would enter. Then he decided to come back for his senior season. So yeah, those two guys, and you would expect just the natural jump from from true freshman year to sophomore year for Peyton Bowen. He did a really good job while he was in there. Didn't get, wasn't a starter for a good majority of the year. Didn't get a lot of snaps, but the snaps that he got were very quality. You'd mentioned played really, really well in those games where he had an opportunity, whether it was the spring game or just in the season in and of itself. So yeah, those are a few guys that certainly will be playmakers. And Oklahoma's had a situation where they've had to rebuild the defensive line to a certain degree, right? And so I think the addition of Dominique Williams from TCU is going to be a big time addition for Oklahoma in the middle of that defensive line. So yeah, I think you've got a lot of if you're an Oklahoma fan, there's a lot of reasons to be happy, to be optimistic, because they've seen a natural progression over the last couple of years, under Brent Venables, and now defensive coordinator Zach Alley coming over from Jacksonville State. You hope that this Oklahoma defense can make that next step and continue to improve as they have over the last couple of years.
Talking Sooners football with all of you here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. Leave those comments and questions. We will get to them here at the Voice of College Football. I've been scanning on my phone looking for a number of comments and questions that came into the channel this week to see if there's anything there of interest as we look at the defense. So you went up front first and foremost on the defense, and it all starts in football, maybe not as much as it did 50 years ago, but still starts in the trenches and establishing the point of attack or crashing the point of attack on defense, but maybe not so much in the Big 12 as is going to be dependent on this defensive front in the SEC to be stout. Do the guys coming off the bus look like an SEC defensive line up front?
So I think that's interesting that you mentioned that. I saw something today, and I hadn't really put two and two together in terms of what that weight looks like. But in 2021, from a defensive line perspective, Oklahoma only had one player, one, that was over 295 pounds. And I think part of that was where that roster was at with Lincoln Riley, with Alex Grinch, and the Speed D moniker that he had brought to Norman in terms of having quicker, more elusive defensive linemen. You take that forward to 2024, Oklahoma has 10 of those guys, right? So you go from that. So I think, to your question, Mark, I think, yeah, on paper this looks more like an SEC defensive line, that you would expect, particularly in the two guys that, I mean, you've Mark, I think you've probably got three guys that they feel good about in the middle. Mentioned Dominique Williams coming over from TCU, and really just wasn't in a position where he could be as disruptive for TCU as probably they would have liked and you would have anticipated. But he was double, triple teamed pretty much on a consistent basis last year at TCU. So I think he's a guy that Oklahoma got post spring that they were super, super excited about getting, and I think he's going to be a guy that I think they believe, at least from an athletic perspective, and what he's been able to do thus far in the college, at TCU, as a guy that can play at the next level. And then the other guy that you have is Dejon Terry, the Tennessee transfer that played a lot last year. So those are two guys. Those are two plus 300 plus guys in the middle of that defensive line. And then I think the other guy to keep, to kind of keep your eye on, just in terms of a defensive tackle, is Grayson Halton. He's a guy he was really, really ballyhooed coming in terms of a recruit. Has had injuries or just hasn't been able to make his way on the field. Did a really good job late last year. Had a really good spring. has had a really good summer from everything that I've heard. So he's a guy that they anticipate being in that mix at that, whatever you want to call nose guard, defensive tackle type positions inside.
I was curious to see, Jason, not to run away from you, but I was tracking down the Phil Steele magazine. It's always exhaustive just to see what he has to say about these position groups. So defensive line, he mentions that Oklahoma loses the defensive end, Bothroyd, who had 13 starts.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got defensive tackle Isaiah Coe, who is also missing, defensive tackle Jacob Lacey, and D tackle Jonah Laulu. Then you got 13 Big 12 defensive lineman Downs, 4.5 sacks. Ethan Downs returns, as does Dejon Terry, Trace Ford. They add first team MAC defensive end Caden Woolard, 12 starts, 9.5 sacks. 14 Big 12 defensive tackle, as you mentioned, Dominic Williams, who for a couple of weeks there was the prize of the transfer portal.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was talking about him. Was the 8th rated player at his position coming out of high school. Linebackers, he says in 2022, Danny Stutzman led the team with 126 tackles. OU still allowed 496 yards per game and 36 points per game versus Big 12 foes. Last year, they lost their number 2 and 3 tacklers. They added Indiana transfer Dason McCullough. Despite losing 2 starters, head coach Brett Venables felt that this unit was in better overall shape and the defense did improve. This year, the Sooners returned the top 6 linebackers and the top 5 tacklers and are the best linebacking core of the Venables era. And, wow, he has this linebacking core ranked as, it appears, might have missed this. He's got them pretty highly ranked. Let's see, linebackers, the number 2 linebacking unit in the country.
That's interesting. I mean, I think when you look at this linebacker core coming into 2024, Mark, it is a group that is probably one of the strengths of the team. I think defensively specifically, I think that the linebacker group as well as the safety group is a group that's probably the strongest. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think Danny Stutzman is a guy that, as I mentioned before, had a great year last year, as you mentioned, 126 tackles. He's a guy that's probably an NFL guy, right? That's still playing college, but has the opportunity to get a little bit better. Now I think he's your starter at the mic. I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. Obviously, then you look at the will. Kip Lewis is a guy that came on strong late last year, who is very instinctual. I think he probably wasn't necessarily where they would love him to be in terms of a weight perspective, but he's worked on that in the summer. So expect that to be a big improvement. And then Jaron Kanik is another guy that's going to battle for that, could battle for that will position. Played a little bit, he was a starter there last year, really kind of ended up getting unseated just a little bit with Kip Lewis and his progressiveness, progression, I should say, from that side of things. And then there's a lot of young talent. There's a lot of athleticism in that group, and yeah, exciting to see. Now, number 2 in the country. I mean, that's lofty. Obviously, I mean, when you said number 2, I was kind of thinking SEC, but overall in the country, yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that how that works from a linebacker core, because yeah, they've got a lot of guys that have played in the past, but making sure that's shored up that full group, and it's not really just Danny Stutzman and the and the others, right? So.
Yeah, that's why when I read that in the Oklahoma summary, I verified it by frantically finding it on the national rankings just to make sure I didn't read that incorrectly. But Phil Steele at linebacker, Iowa 1, Oklahoma 2, Georgia 3, Texas 4, Oklahoma State 5. There it is.
So I would say, Mark, if Oklahoma lives up to that top 5 linebacker core billing, then certainly that leads you to believe that Oklahoma's going to have a really good year defensively, because they feel good about where they're at on the back end. Like as I mentioned, particularly at safety, there might be a couple of questions at cornerback from a depth perspective, but this should be good on the back half. And I think there's just probably, Mark, a lot of, and concern is not the right word, just looking for someone to step up at that edge position. You'd mentioned just from a defensive line, while you're looking at that, you've mentioned Ethan Downs. Venables said Ethan Downs is the only guy that coming into the season, he's a starter. The rest of them are up for grabs. And you'd mentioned a lot of the guys that Oklahoma has had to replace, and so it is having to replace. So it's a little bit similar to the situation that Oklahoma has on the offensive line in terms of having to replace a lot of guys. They've got a lot of good kids there, but are they able to? How are they able to play? You mentioned Caden Woolard coming over. He's a guy at the defensive end position, at the edge position, that has some promise. But I would say athletically, PJ Adebaware, he's the best. He's the best one that they have from an athletic perspective. He looks the part. He looks like an when you mention like coming off the bus, he looks like an NFL player. But he's only a sophomore. He's got the body. Does he is he able to make that big jump? Right. I mean, I think the thought was he probably would make a pretty big jump from the end of the season to the spring. Didn't really show itself, on the field, but some kids, it takes a little bit longer for that proverbial light bulb to turn on. So is he a guy that's going to be able to be a really good player for them on the edge, along with Ethan Downs and Caden Woolard? So you'll see. I mean, you got Trace Ford that was there last year from Oklahoma State, made some nice plays, but he's not a necessarily like a game changer on that side of the ball. So I think that's probably, I would say, the biggest question mark. Not necessarily in the middle, but more from an edge perspective on what they're able to do.
All right. Looking at defensive back, and again, keeping in mind, this is just the Phil Steele take, just to give another perspective. 21st rated defensive line, number 2 rated linebacking core. He says about the DBs, in 2022, OU made a large jump in pass defensive rankings to number 45, 20 touchdowns, 17 picks, which is a really good ratio against quarterback play, 20 touchdowns, 17 picks. That led the Big 12 in interceptions, even though they were last in the Big 12 in yards given up per game in 22. In 2023, they lost 2 starters and 5 of their top 7 cornerbacks. They added Reggie Pearson from Texas Tech. The Sooners rose all the way to number 8 in the pass defensive rankings. And these are not the national pass defense rankings. These are Phil Steele's compilation. 18 touchdowns, 20 picks. That's an excellent ratio when you're intercepting more passes than giving up touchdowns. Billy Bowman had the huge 100-yard interception return against BYU, one of 3 pick sixes. This year they lose safety Key Lawrence and safety Reggie Pearson, but return 3 starters and add San Diego State starter Des Malone. They are, listen to this, number 2 at linebacker. The defensive back rankings nationally, Ohio State number 1, Oklahoma number 2.
It's such an odd thing to think about, right? When we went last week, when you were talking about the offensive rankings, and Oklahoma was down. I mean, in a couple of those in the 40s, right? And then you've got linebacker at number 2, and then defensive, the secondary at number 2 as well. So I think it lines up when you look at the strength of the defense. I think absolutely the linebacking core and the back end, the back 7 is going to be, it looks to be the strength of this defense. You'd mentioned Des Malone coming over from San Diego State, started the last 23 games at San Diego State. He's a plug and play guy that they feel good about. for Oklahoma. You've got Gentry Williams, who was unfortunately he was banged up quite a bit when he was healthy. He was very very good, very aggressive. Has got really great instincts. You saw him early on against Texas really kind of set the tone for Oklahoma defensively, getting that interception early on in that game. Was out a little bit in that game in Oklahoma. You saw a little bit of that in terms of how they played the rest of the way defensively, particularly the back half of that game. And then you got Woody Washington as a guy you'd mentioned there as well. He's a guy that a 6-year guy for Oklahoma has made 36 starts in his career. I think that they may look at opportunities to move him around. He may be a guy that ends up being their nickelback if they feel good about Dez Malone and Gentry Williams there at the cornerback position, and they've got a lot of guys that they feel good from a depth perspective at Jacoby Johnson, Makari Vickers, Kenai Walker. Those are guys that have played. I mean, Kenai Walker has the most experience over the last couple of years, but Makari Vickers got a little bit of time. Jacoby Johnson got some time in special teams, and so those were the guys that you look at. But then when you look at the safeties as well, you've got Billy Bowman and you've got Peyton Bowen probably in some kind of a starting position. Robert Spears Jennings stepped up and played a lot, a really heavy hitter, a big enforcer on the back end as well. Then they've got a couple of freshmen that may have the ability to help a little bit, at least from a depth perspective early on. Specifically, I think Reggie Powers is a guy that I've heard a lot of good things about in terms of he's a guy that could be ready to help them early on. And so, yeah, I don't know that I would go so far to say I mean, you can make an argument, but number two is tough to live up to. But again, how we've talked, over the last few weeks, Mark, about where this team could get to from a win-loss perspective. If you've got, and I'm not even going to say number two, if you've got top five in the country, linebacker core and secondary, this is a team that, I mean, if you're that good in the back level, then it maybe masks some of your, if you've got some struggles at the edge position. Um, so I think overall, the not specifically just the defense, Mark, but I think overall, I think Oklahoma likes the talent that they have. They like the guys that they have here now. Obviously, on the field is a little bit different, and some of the teams that they haven't played, obviously in the SEC, and just kind of getting used to that grind. But I think they like what they have. The pieces that they have, I think they would like probably to the point that we've been talking about. I think they would like maybe they really need to have someone step up from that edge position. But yeah, it's just a matter of going out and doing it on the field, because this has been a team. It's a little bit of I mean, although they've improved each year, it's a little bit of a kind of a sign that they've started strong both the last 2 years, and they've kind of faltered a bit down the stretch in some of these in some of these games later in the season. So with this being more of a grind that we've talked about, that's going to be critically important to make sure that they have good depth where they're in a position where they'll be able to compete at a high level, even when they've got some of these backup guys in, and as they finish that last portion of the season.
I know I'm going to roll off a ton of ifs here, so I get it. Anytime you say, well, if that happens and that happens and that happens, and it gets to be a little ridiculous, but still, if you get the 21st rated, if these rankings are generally accurate, if you get the 21st ranked defensive line in the country, that's not exceptional, that's not great, but that's pretty good. That's decent. There are 135 teams playing football. Now in the SEC, understand that there's going to be a larger proportion of better defensive lines in your league than if you moved to the ACC, for example. But still, number 21, if you have the second best linebackers and the second best secondary, then you can get away with the 21st. Again, that's a decent defensive line. So then the running back room is strong, and the wide receiver play should be one of the strengths on the team. That if Jackson Arnold and the offensive line are capable. And the offensive line, again, is not inexperienced. It's just inexperienced at Oklahoma. And with one of the top offensive line coaches in the country, that sounds like it's the makings of a surprise team.
Yeah, I think Mark, you have to, and you've been doing this a long time. I've been through this for quite some time as well. I think what you hear early on in fall camp, I think goes with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? But I think they from an offensive line perspective, and this is some of the things that I've heard early on in fall camp, they feel really good about their guys. They feel really good about who they have. There's not It's a far cry from where they were in spring. I'll say that. There was some comments that I heard. They're like, "Wow, this is where we're at." And part of that was with some injuries, and there's Branson Hickman, the transfer from SMU, wasn't in at that point, and so it was a little bit of a struggle in spring. But and again, some of this is probably coach speak that you hear, but this was the best summer that they've had in a long time as a group. This is the best summer that they've had just buying into everything that Schmidt's doing from a strength and conditioning perspective. And so I think they feel good about their guys. I think, what remains to be seen is how they play together, as we've mentioned with these guys moving, being from, a lot of these guys will be transfers. Five of their probably top six guys will be transfers coming in. So the thing that it's not completely uncommon to think about, but the thing that I continue to hear from various different people is this team is likely to go as far as Jackson Arnold takes them. So if he is, and I think you take a lot from how he played against when you move this forward to this 2024 season, you take a lot from how he performed against Arizona in in the bowl game. If you see that Jackson Arnold, like this very much could be a 6-6, 7-5 team, even a 5-7 team, just in terms of the turnovers. But all indications was he took that performance really, really hard, and that has kind of fueled him in terms of his progression over the summer and the fall so far. And I think maybe it's one of those things, Mark, you don't like to see someone struggle in his first start, but maybe it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise looking at, him struggling early on in that game, being a little bit inconsistent. If he would have had, if he would have went 30 for 38 with 380 yards and 4 touchdowns and no interceptions, maybe he doesn't have that drive that kind of pulls him through the off season. So I think the difference in this team being probably if everything aligns as you have described right here, on the defensive side, you've got a top five linebacker group, you've got a top five safety group, you've got a top 20, just say top 20 defensive line in the country, and everything else is really solidified from a running back perspective. Someone steps up there. I mean, I think it could be the difference between, like I said, 6-6, 7-5, or potentially a 9-3 team. Now, it's kind of one of those like things where, Mark, I would have to see it to believe it. Like for a team stepping in year one, and being 10-2 in this league. Now, I mean, if the stars align, I think that's possible, right? Sure, like, but I think, and I hate we've we've talked about this before. I hate floors and I hate ceilings when you talk about that, because particularly floors, because what one floor could be, um, with multiple injuries, that floor could drop a little bit, right? But I think, um, if this team gets if they get the type of quarterback play that they're looking for, even if it's somewhat comparable to what they got last year with Dylan Gabriel or even the year before. I think this is a team that is improved. The roster and talent has improved at all other positions, where they do have the ability and have the possibility to go 9-3. And again, um, I mean, we would see how that shakes out. But if you go 9-3, you think that's probably got to be good enough for probably fourth, fifth in the SEC, and probably has a really good chance to get you in the playoffs. So um, I completely agree with you, Mark. I think this is a team, if those things align and they get really solid quarterback play from Jackson Arnold, that they can certainly be a surprise team, to your point. Because I think nationally, and I don't know and I haven't looked at the magazine from Phil Steele yet, if where he's got Oklahoma just in the order of finish in the season from a prediction perspective. But yeah, that if those things align, they could be certainly in the top 3 or 4.
So he did not rank, or I'm sorry, he did not make record predictions.
Okay.
Neither did Athlon. They've given up on that. They're not record predictions. However, there are rankings. So he has his power rankings, which are simply these are the best teams in the country, number one, number two, all the way down, all the way to the bottom. So that is simply how good he thinks the teams are. Now, then he has his predictions, which is a national rankings prediction, which takes the schedule into account. And
Right.
this is how difficult he thinks Oklahoma's schedule is. He believes that Oklahoma has the 7th best team in the country. Now, when he puts that together with the schedule, he ranks them 20th.
Yep. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, and it's and, as I think we talked about this last week. Maybe not necessarily just the schedule, but the fact that it's the first year with this type of schedule maybe makes that a little bit, maybe makes that look a little bit different.
So, for as many times, Jason, as I've looked at Oklahoma's schedule this offseason and looked at Texas's schedule, I've not looked at them at the same time because I keep hearing about how much more difficult Oklahoma's schedule is. Now, this is within the SEC. Of course, Oklahoma does not play a difficult non-conference schedule, and Texas goes to Michigan. But within the SEC, let's do this. Rank Oklahoma's opponents in the SEC toughest to easiest.
Okay. I would go. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say. So are we when we rank these, are we looking at
Okay.
team combined with venue or just
Yes.
team?
Yes.
Okay.
What are going to be the toughest games, top to bottom? Let's see.
I would say, um,
Can't get that any smaller.
yeah,
So
no,
LSU's at the bottom.
yeah, I think I still would say Alabama is the toughest, even though with that game's at home, I still would consider that game the toughest because I know we don't have rankings yet. I think these are probably post spring rankings from FBS schedules or
Yeah.
something like that. Um, so yeah, I think Alabama probably is the toughest. Now, when you look at now the next one is interesting. I probably would go. I mean, I'll just go Texas because it's always one of the um, toughest games of the season, regardless. I mean, it'll be interesting to see when the rankings come out, but everybody loves Texas. I mean, I've heard multiple prognosticators have them in the SEC championship game. I think they'll be good. I don't know that they'll be quite that good, just in terms of what they've lost off of that team over a year ago. But that game's it's always different. So I would put Texas number two. I think the next toughest one for me, uh, probably probably because of the environment, I would say at LSU. I know they've got a lot to replace on the offensive side of the ball, specifically at quarterback and receiver, but that's just such a tough place to play. I would put that there. I think I would probably put Ole Miss next, just because the combination of environment and how good they're going to be. I think it does give Oklahoma a little bit of a benefit, the fact that that will be an early game, and it may not be quite as rowdy as an environment as you would normally expect to see. So I would go there. The only game after Alabama is LSU, right, on the schedule?
Yes.
There's nothing. Okay. Okay. Here's where it gets a little bit tough. I would say at Missouri next. Then I would go at Auburn. Tennessee at home. And then South Carolina at home. I hope I didn't miss any.
See, that's all 8. Okay. Now, unfortunately, we can't represent this graphically to put them side by side because that's what I would like to do. But I'm just curious to see how this looks next to a Texas schedule, top to bottom. So with Texas, throw out the non-conference games. All right, so we're looking at okay, I think we got them all in Texas A&M. Yeah, they're all there. So how would you rank Texas?
I would probably go. I would go Georgia #1, even though that's in Texas. That's still their toughest game. I would probably. That one's tough. I would probably go, just because of the newness of the rivalry and it being at Kyle Field, I'll go at A&M #2, Oklahoma #3, and gosh, you've got like bottom half of the SEC here the rest of the way.
I'm missing somebody. Oh, Mississippi State's up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you've answered my question already, but keep going.
The fact that it's on the road, I'll go at Arkansas next.
Okay.
But and then I would go Kentucky.
Okay.
Florida. Mississippi State. And at Vanderbilt.
Okay, this is the first time I've ever done this with these two schedules for as much as we have, and we have otherwise talked about these two teams and the comparisons of their personnel and their schedules. Wow, it's not even close. So
I've kind of asked Mark, like,
wow,
what did Oklahoma what did Oklahoma do or wrong, or what did Texas do? And you have to maybe in year 3 and year 4 maybe it'll flip a little bit, right? But and some of these are, Florida's going to be down this year. I think we all believe that's probably going to be the case, right?
Yeah.
Arkansas is a little bit down this year, the way it looks, but the fact that they get Arkansas, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and and Oklahoma has Tennessee, LSU, Alabama.
Think of it this way. They play each other, so throw that game out. So they've got 7 opponents, and I have no issue with the way you ranked either one of them. you could squabble about one spot here and there, but throw a blanket over for Oklahoma, LSU, Ole Miss, Mizzou, and maybe even Auburn and Tennessee if they play a little bit better. For Texas, after Texas A&M, throw a blanket over Arkansas, Kentucky, Florida, Mississippi State. So if Texas A&M is Texas's second toughest game, and Tennessee is Oklahoma's second easiest game, those Texas A&M and Tennessee, if anything,
Hmm.
Tennessee's going to be ranked higher than Texas A&M in the preseason rankings.
Absolutely, they are.
Like
Yeah,
this is not even close. Wow.
it's not. No, it's not. And so that kind of lends to Phil Steele's comparison right there, right, with Oklahoma, feeling Oklahoma might be the seventh most talented team in the country, but at the end of the day, being number 20, like, and so if Oklahoma had Texas's schedule, I would have no issues with 9-3, 10-2. No issue. And maybe that's why Texas is being considered, Mark, as a team that a lot of people think can make it to the SEC championship game, because they should not, and I don't say challenge, right? I mean, because it's the SEC, you don't know what's going to happen. But outside of Georgia, and not like that's not a winnable game. Like they've got that game at home. Like you could very much see this Texas team one loss, two losses in the SEC. Like who's gonna beat them other than Georgia and Oklahoma maybe?
How do the schedulers not? I would think that there's a science to this. It's not an art. It's generally a science.
Hmm.
Why? And then if you get done, if you think you have a great formula, but you get done, then before you release it, you obviously start to make comparisons and say, okay, let's make sure, let's double check this and triple check that. And you're doing all these cross analysis. Here's one simple solution. On October 26th, now this doesn't balance the scales, but it would be a huge step in the right direction. On October 26th, just switch. Texas plays Ole Miss and Oklahoma plays Vandy.
Yeah, I mean, I think OU fans would love to see that have a, I mean, because Vanderbilt is the SEC's version of what used to be Kansas, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, absolutely. I would,
And this,
and
this,
and it's
I'm
and the
sorry,
thing that's
Jason. I was just going to say this shouldn't happen.
no, I mean, it should be a little bit more, definitely more balanced than what it is. But I think Oklahoma people are not really. I think maybe they don't feel like they're in a position to complain about this, because I think Oklahoma's just so excited to be in the SEC. You know what I
Sure.
mean? So I think it's not, if this was now. I think the thing that'll be interesting to think through, Mark, as we go forward, it sounds like there's a lot of momentum to move to a nine game SEC slate next year. So what does that do to that? And I don't know if that next year or when it would happen, Mark, but I know that there's some momentum around that. I heard that through some of the SEC media day thing. So what does that do to that schedule? So um, yeah, I think it'll be very intriguing to look at. But yeah, they definitely did Oklahoma no favors, in that schedule. I think a couple the there's a little bit of saving grace in some of this, but not much, right? I mean, the one thing that you think about, maybe you've caught Auburn in a good year to go there, right? Maybe you've caught LSU in a little bit of a good year to go there, but my gosh, Ole Miss is going to be a top 5, 7 team probably. Auburn's going to be undefeated by the time. I mean, I know that I just said that they caught a little bit of a break, but Auburn's probably going to be 4-0 when Oklahoma goes and plays there, right? I think they've got Cal. I think that's probably their best opponent that they face before hosting Oklahoma. So So yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things, Mark, where if this was, if this was like year 5 in the SEC, I think there would be an uproar. But I think it's one of those things where, hey, you're letting us sit at the table with you. It's okay. Like, even though that you guys are eating a 5-course meal and I'm eating McDonald's, it's okay. We're just happy to be here right now. So I think that's really the thought process that they probably have going on right now. Not only that, they don't have 11 a.m. games, right? I think there's 2 on the schedule, potentially 11 to 12, and so I think Oklahoma had like 5 or 6 last year. So
They had 2 other options here as well. Last weekend of September, give Texas Auburn on the road and give Oklahoma Mississippi State. Or on November 23rd, give Texas Alabama and give Oklahoma Kentucky. They had 3 opportunities just to make a quick flip and give it more balance.
yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy that that it's not more balanced. And I'm like you. I would be interested to see what was the thought process going in terms of how that was selected and what the decision making criteria was.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jason, if you had something to talk about for about 30 seconds, I was just curious to add up the records of these teams last year.
Yeah, yeah.
You
So
said it was pretty quiet on the recruiting front, but whatever you want to
yeah.
talk about, it's fine.
Well, I was just gonna say I was looking up the schedule here, and as we were talking a little bit about Auburn. So Auburn has so first of all they don't leave Jordan Hare Stadium before they play Oklahoma. They play Alabama A&M at home. They play Cal at home. They play New Mexico at home, and they play Arkansas at home before hosting Oklahoma. So there's a good chance that they're going to be 4-0, and probably if they're 4-0, they're going to be ranked in the top 25 um, when you uh, when you look at that. But Auburn's schedule, I mean, just kind of thinking about schedules, like their schedule is bizarre. So their first 5 games are at home. They don't leave the state of Alabama until October. So, but they have 3 back to back to back tough games when they go to Georgia, to Missouri, to Kentucky in consecutive weeks. And so they don't come back to Alabama until November, but then they're in Alabama the rest of the way. They host Vandy, they have an off week, they host Louisiana Monroe, and um, they host Texas A&M before going to Alabama on November 30th. So um, I think it'll be intriguing, Mark, when you look at the schedule when they play these games. How many how many top 25 games is Oklahoma going to have? I mean, potentially. I mean, I don't know. From a mid-major perspective, Tulane's one of the best mid-major non P4 programs. So you could make an argument that they're Tulane, Tennessee, Auburn, Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, LSU. So not what 8 of the 12 games that Oklahoma's going to have are probably going to be against ranked teams. So
Oklahoma's schedule, the opponents that they have in the SEC, well, we might as well to actually vet it out all the way. We could include Texas. Their opponents went 76-29 last year. And Texas's opponents went 52-48. They're 24 games better.
That's insane. But I mean, if you want to go further on this, Mark, you can. If you're a conspiracy theorist, right? I think and it's going to come. It's not going to come great coming from me being an Oklahoma guy, but I think there's a lot of momentum. I think people want Texas to be good. People want Texas to be a team, and I don't know that they necessarily want, I'm not saying that they want Texas to win the SEC in their first year. I know the SEC would not want that to happen, right? I mean, but I think just generally speaking, nationally, I think people want Texas to be good. So I don't know. It's it's kind of bizarre. I think you could probably look at these teams and it may be vice versa, right? Like Oklahoma's the number 7th ranked team in terms of talent, but are 20. Texas could be, and I don't know what he has them ranked, but they could be 12 or 14, and they could be probably top 5 because of the schedule. Now again, I mean, I think it's a balancing act, Mark, because you've got Texas probably has two. I mean, they have two tougher opponents than Oklahoma does, right? When you look at Georgia, and then when you look at Michigan, but both of those games are at home, though, right? I believe Georgia's at home and Michigan's at
At
home.
Michigan.
Oh, at Michigan, okay.
Yeah.
But so still, those are two. But the totality of the schedule is tough. But I don't know. I mean, and I'm like you. I haven't really spent a lot of time just really looking at schedules within the SEC in terms of who I think could win the SEC championship. But it's they're tough. Like these schedules are tough. Like Alabama, I mean they host Georgia in late September, but they go to Tennessee, they go to LSU, they go to Oklahoma. So I think whoever wins I don't know that we're going to see an undefeated SEC team this year. So which gives more. I mean, and then Georgia, they go to Kentucky, to Alabama, to Texas, to Ole Miss. So it's going to be. I say that to say, Mark, I think it's going to be. I wouldn't be even remotely surprised to see Texas make the SEC championship game because of the schedule. And I think Oklahoma would have an argument if they were in the schedule as well.
I possibly am making a video right now for myself. Here are the SEC records. Oklahoma's schedule went 36-20 in the SEC, and Texas's went 19-37.
Wow. It just makes you think. I mean, it does. Like you just love to know what the thought process was there.
And I looked at it for, we looked at it for a few minutes here. And again, I found 3 weekends where and it even lined up correctly home and road. They could have just went,
yeah,
flipped them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. All right, Sooner fans, appreciate you being here, the voice of college football and all of College Football Nation here. Thank you so much for being here. Hit the like button on your way out. And Jason and I get together each and every week to talk Oklahoma football. Don't know exactly when. We've got schedules to organize. That's why you just please subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. But we are just about 3 weeks away from week 0 and 4 weeks away from Oklahoma against Temple, correct?
Correct.
Yep,
Friday night. Yes,
yep.
Friday night.
All right. Jason, we appreciate you being here. It's always a fun discussion.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
See everyone next week.